Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's doing well. Can we please have uh, hi, morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to our latest education webinar on compensation for startups. I'm joined here with my colleague and friend, Sherry. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, Sajat.
We are hoping to spend the next hour, sharing some thoughts around, compensation for startups, but not limited to startups itself. Some of the things we want to talk about. We thought of organizing this webinar after having, been in touch with a number of, startups, talking about the challenges we're seeing in the space over the last few months across the world. And we just thought that there are a number of things that I think we can share from our years working in some of the largest companies, which I think would really benefit the startup space, as we specifically think about long-term sustainability, which becomes very important. I'm going to pass it over to Sherry to introduce herself, and then I'll do a quick intro, and then we'll get into it. Sherry, over to you.
Thank you, Sajat. Thank you, everyone. As Sajat shared, we are both very passionate about all things compensation, all things reward. So my entire career has been in compensation or reward. I started off at JP Morgan, and then I moved to GSK and eBay. And in between and after, I've also done consulting work for a couple of startups. One of them is a unicorn, and a couple of SMEs as well. So like Sajat shared, we thought that this was a very timely introduction, as we ramp up into the compensation review process, and also heading into 2023, maybe we thought it would be useful to share some tips and tricks, things to think about.
Thanks, Sherry. My name is Sajat Parmar. I've just started an HR sort of startup of my own by the name of Talent Accelerator. That's the logo you see at the back. I've spent my predominantly most of my career in comp as well, starting with Unilever in Pakistan, moving to Singapore with them, and then moving to GSK, where Sherry and I got to know each other. We worked together in eBay, which was my last job, which I just wrapped up in July, and we've been running this Talent Accelerator since then. As we start talking about the topic, and I'll pass over to Sherry to lead us into the discussion and share what we have to share. I just wanted to share, the latest that's just come out a couple of days back. That's the Gartner priorities for 2023, and the number 2 on the list is actually org design, which Sherry will talk about. And number 3 is employee experience. This is about 800 companies over 60 countries saying that org design and employee experience, a big portion of which is around wellness and pay and all of those things, is a top priority for these companies globally. So we are hoping to spend the next 35-40 minutes going through the materials we have. Some of you have already shared with us some questions, which we'll cover towards the end. I will definitely keep time towards the end for an open session. If anybody has any specific questions, we'll be happy to take those on. So I'll pass it to Sherry to take us through what we have. I'll jump in as and when I need to. If you have any questions, please hold them till the end of the webinar. Yeah, Sherry, over to you.
Thank you. So I mean, just the background, we have a whole range of experience here. So I'm trying to keep things as simple and layman as possible. So hopefully, everyone can understand. Happy to connect offline if any of you have more thoughts or want more detail about the material that we're sharing. As Sajat mentioned, actually, sorry, Sajat, are you projecting the slides?
Hang on, I'm just about to do that. Give me a second. Please let me know when you can see the screen. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, as Sajat shared earlier, we also have another infographic from Gartner on the first slide. We thought this would be a good starting point just to share that if you are a senior leader or a CEO of a startup or a SME or just any other company, that you are not alone. There were more than 400 senior business leaders who were polled in this survey. And what has been very interesting is that the concerns and priorities about workforce issues has jumped significantly, up 30%, and from 5th place in 2020. So this has even overtaken the concern for financial challenges. And some of these workforce challenges, again, you're not alone. If you have been kept up at night, concerned about attracting and retaining talent, about culture and productivity, particularly with remote and hybrid working arrangements, and of course resignations. So I know, I'm sure most of you have heard of the term the Great Resignation, as well as quiet quitting. A lot of this stems from employees who are dissatisfied with pay, with benefits, with career development opportunities, and just feeling like they need better work-life balance. So we will also cover some of these topics in the webinar. But also, just to call out the other two blurbs, almost 3/4 of CEOs who were surveyed by PwC are concerned about the availability of key skills. So also with that, how to attract and retain employees. And 80% of CEOs and chief HR officers need to quickly align their talent strategy with business strategy. So that interconnectedness is something that you will see as a constant theme throughout this webinar. The need to have a very clear and well thought out strategy that links with various parts of the organization, and not looking at things in isolation is something that will be a common thread as we proceed through this webinar. So if we move to the next slide, you will see that not only talent and business strategy are interconnected, but also reward, and underpinning this, I guess, also costs. And actually, the top reasons why talents leave startups, obviously it's pay and benefits, but also there's that frustration around the lack of clear strategy and direction, and the lack of career development and progression. So in order to retain and attract, firstly, we have to have the right reward management strategy, philosophy, as well as talent management. I know the title of the webinar is Compensation for Startups, but really compensation is not just about salary. A lot of times when we speak to managers, senior leaders, it's a lot of gripe around salaries, but really it's a much broader framework of total reward. It's not just compensation. Under compensation alone, it's not just about your fixed pay or salary. There are short-term incentives, long-term incentives, recognition, which is a big thing that employees are feeling undervalued and under-recognized about. There are benefits. So on top of your standard insurance and healthcare, increasingly we're seeing a lot of interesting benefits, and as well as wellness, which is also seen as very preventative. So before your employees require medical or healthcare support, what kind of wellness plans you can have in your company in order to prevent them from requiring medical intervention. And on top of that, I know there are a lot of words on this slide, but in terms of performance management, organizational design, which Sajat had touched on earlier, and with that interconnectedness of analytics, reward communication, and training, what we also want to draw your attention to is really developing a full, solid employee value proposition. So this is a term that I'll be using throughout the webinar as well. Really, it means the branding that your company has to have an added edge and value over your competitors. So it could be also in the form of your company culture. So it's not just isolated to total reward, the organizational values that you have. And now, increasingly, a lot of the younger employees in the workforce are looking towards social responsibility, the company, career development opportunities and talent management, as well as a very meritocratic framework can together form an employee value proposition, which in totality can be used to attract, engage, very importantly, and also to retain employees. So this also gives the company a very added edge, because then a lot of what you will be doing will be proactive instead of reactive.
I'll just add a couple of points, Sherry. You know, the framework might look a bit intimidating, but I would say that a lot of this is actually not that difficult or complex, right? So in its at the base point, as Sherry talked about reward philosophy and the things we need to have, benefits and all of that. I think ultimately, if you have a solid base in terms of the framework that's that's running your company, you can actually plug and play things that make sense to you. We have a multi-generational workforce, right? So their needs are different. What X wants versus baby boomers versus the Gen Z versus the Ys, it's all different, and we've come to understand those differences. So if the base is okay and philosophically your principles and your frameworks are in place, adding and taking out or managing becomes easier. And cost is something that we'll talk about later. The other key aspect, which I know a lot of companies unfortunately miss out, is around reward communication and training. You look at the startup world, and startups obviously want to do the best thing for their employees, build a good culture. They have all these things in place. The problem is we don't communicate well. And that's actually applied, and that applies to large companies as well, who actually go out of the way, especially because of COVID. I know a lot of work that was done by companies, added new benefits, wellness portfolios, all of that. But are we communicating it well to the employees? Do the employees actually really understand all the things that companies are doing for them? And I think there's a big miss for most of us in that we do things, but we don't communicate well, and we don't show how some of these sort of relate to what you need as a professional, as a person. So I think there's a trick that we miss.
Thank you, Sajat. There was a very key point that you raised. So without further ado, maybe we should take a step back at this point. In building a total reward framework, using the anecdote of building a house, the first thing you need will be your blueprint. So really, this is your organization design, what is underlying in your strategy, how do you want your organization to operate, what structures and systems do you need in place in order to achieve the ways of working that you want. Typically, there are 3 triggers for organization design, or in some cases, redesign. It's a change in environment, a change in strategy, or realizing that your current design is no longer fit for purpose. So we recommend that things are done every once in a while. For a startup, for example, if you have grown from a headcount of 5 to 50 to 200, then it's probably time to relook at your organization design. So just to illustrate in the organization structure in the next slide, don't be alarmed if in a startup your organization structure looks a bit more like a square or a rectangle, because for startups, the structures tend to be simpler, a lot flatter and more centralized. But the point of illustrating this pyramid organization structure is really based on experience. This is one of the most ideal organization structures, where you keep it really lean at the top, you have a few key leaders or decision makers in the organization. This could be your CEO, CFO, CHRO, for example. And then you have a slightly bulkier middle management section. These are your supervisors and team leaders who will help to translate and ensure that the vision and the strategy of the company is being cascaded to what is your what should form your bulkiest part of the organization structure. The executioners, these are your individual contributors and people who are focused on delivering. So it is important why we call this out, because in some cases, because of aggressive hiring practices or just, lack of an oversight, the organization structure starts to become a bit more diamond-shaped, or even in worst cases, potentially an inverted pyramid. And that leads to a lot of downstream consequences, such as inefficiencies due to the bureaucracy. So you have way too many people making decisions, but not enough people to execute on them. And this will impact performance. And also it will impact your costs if you have too many senior leaders and not enough executioners who are actually performing. So really, how organization design impacts compensation, you have both your bottom line and your top line. Your bottom line impact are your everyday costs, whether or not you're performing. You have your running employment costs in salaries, equity, benefits, and then of course, the shape of your organization structure, whether it's a pyramid or an inverted pyramid, will impact your bottom line. And very closely linked is employee engagement and employee turnover. If employees are not engaged, firstly, it impacts your top line because they might not be productive. And then, of course, you have a true bottom line cost with turnover, having to rehire and retrain employees. I'll just pause here for a while, Sajat. Anything to add? Okay.
Sorry about that. No, nothing to add. Good to go.
Right. So I know we've covered quite a lot in the first few slides. We don't want to shock everyone. Basically, what we're trying to say is there are a lot of considerations, but building a framework could actually be done in a couple of easy steps. Just keep the key priorities in mind. Firstly, you need your blueprint or organization design. That should be the foundation before you kick off that framework. This will help, for example, lead on to job evaluations, which I will cover more in the next slide. But once you've gotten your foundation, that's where you can build on policies, such as your pay philosophy, and how you want to benchmark data. So we'll cover a bit more of this later on as well. This also then links to performance management. Again, talent management and reward are very interconnected. So to have a proper performance management design and plan, it should also link very closely to your incentive programs. So after you can measure how you have performed, it should be very clearly linked and communicated to how you pay. And
Just
then
the only point I want to, sorry, Sherry, go ahead.
No worries.
The only point I wanted to add was that, this might seem like, oh my God, that's a lot of work to do. But like I said, this is a very logical step. Most progressive and mature companies in the world would have this in place already, because your org design impacts the kind of roles and people you need in the organization. How you pay them, how you treat them, how you develop them, like Sherry said, will happen around the pay philosophy, market benchmark. If you have a business that has 3 very different businesses, right? You sell ice cream, you also make light bulbs, and you also provide financial services, right? So you might think about a corporate philosophy, but you might need a separate way of managing people and roles and pay and all things for each of the different businesses. So having that org design in mind really impacts in terms of what you do in terms of compensation. And to Sherry's point, performance management from a downstream perspective is around reward differentiation, paying your top performers top dollars, right? And obviously incentive programs become very, very important. For startups, I know, equity grants are very much high up there, and equity grants make up a huge portion of your cost. But are your equity grants really optimized in terms of driving both the short term and long term? And that would impact to an extent from how you've designed your performance management. If you just keep giving LTIs without any hooks, then it's only going to impact your business performance, but also your cost, and that will impact your long-term sustainability.
Yep. And just to quickly add on to that point, it's important again to link it back to paying for performance. So that truly differentiates how we incentivize performance, and as a outcome of that, your top performer should be receiving higher incentive than a low or medium performer. So just very quickly, what are job evaluations? This term might be new to some of you. It really is a systematic process where we assess the relative size of a job, and it measures the actual requirements and responsibilities of a job, disregarding who the job holder is. So this is not an evaluation of the individual, but really the job and its responsibilities. So the reason why we need this is to enable a comparison of the roles in equivalent complexity and size, not only internally, but externally. And this is important because a lot of times when people compare jobs, if somebody presents themselves as a director, for example, the title can sound very big, but what the job evaluation does is really, it goes down into the nitty-gritty to find out what exactly this person does in the job, rather than just comparing titles. And job evaluations are important because it helps you analyze and understand your organization. As you can see, sorry, the graphic is a little bit small, but it actually helps you to almost visualize what your organization structure looks like. You can see who the decision maker is, the middle management here, as well as the executioners. And potentially, by building a map of jobs and responsibilities, it also helps you determine efficiencies or where you could be more productive. For example, if there are responsibilities that overlap, how potentially you could clean that up, make the function more efficient and employees more productive. Having a map of jobs can also lead into the next step, which is to build your pay scales or salary ranges. And this is important. Sorry, Sajat, next slide, please. Yeah. This is an example to illustrate what a pay structure looks like. So ideally, there are different pay structures for different functions because, typically, for example, the salaries for somebody in legal couldn't compare to somebody in tech, for example. And then on the left-hand column, you can see the job grades. So this then very clearly illustrates the minimum, midpoint, and maximum that you will pay, maximum salary you would pay for each grade. And as you can see, the maximum of grade 9, for example, 8,700. Again, these numbers are just for illustration. Actually is higher than the minimum of grade 8. So this shows the progression of the employee. And the reason why pay structures or salary ranges are important is because firstly, it provides a very consistent framework and boundary. You know that the max you should pay for a grade 9, for example, is 8,700. And this helps to improve accountability in managers. It helps manage costs. So for example, if you were building out a new function and you knew that you have to hire a couple of employees at grade 6, grade 7, and maybe 2 at grade 8, this could help you quickly calculate the costs or the budget that you have to set aside in order to staff this function. Also, if done well, your pay structure should also include market benchmarks. And so really, if your pay structures are up to date, it enables you to be competitive and attract the right talent.
Excuse me, can we have the phones on mute, please? Hi. Thank you.
Okay, but as we mentioned, it's not all about pay. As we move into the next section, you can see in this chart, really base pay, which is the line in blue, or your salary, is really just a hygiene factor. This is what gets your employee out of bed and into work every day. And in some countries, you have the orange bit, which is the cash allowance. This could be due to market practice or for tax efficiency, for tax efficiencies. But really what differentiates employees and should be linked to performance are your incentives. So that is the portion in gray, which is your short-term incentives. And this makes up your total cash compensation. And then potentially for startups and also for most senior leaders or key decision makers in most companies, whether it's a startup or an MNC, we also utilize long-term incentives, which is the bit in yellow, to make up total direct compensation. And then, of course, to complete the package, importantly, you have benefits, which is the portion in blue. Again, these graphs are not entirely representative of the percentage or the proportion of your compensation that should be in either base pay or short or long-term incentives. It's really just to illustrate that your total compensation doesn't only depend on salary. We will cover more about the STIs or short-term incentives and LTIs in the further sections, but Sajat, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, we're obviously oversimplifying, how salaries and total pay structures with this slide. Of course, there is a little bit of science that happens because, for example, your sales employees are sometimes the incentive is almost sometimes as equal to their base pay, right? And that is dependent on the kind of incentive that you put for them. Similarly, at lower grades, the incentive amount could be a bit lower, but as you go and you talk about leaders, the amount of incentive you put on them, right, because they're making all the key strategic decisions, is a lot higher. Similarly, from an LTI perspective, right, and Sherry will talk about the kinds of LTI, but this is just to give an illustration. And as we talk about attraction and retention, we don't, from our reward perspective, we only not only benchmark and see whether our pay is competitive, we actually should, as a best practice, compare how our total cash and total remuneration compares with the rest of the market as well, right? You might be paying a little bit of a low pay, but you put a lot of money on incentive. Other company might be paying a higher base pay, but low on incentive. So it's always a good time. It's always a good practice to make sure that not only are you looking at base pay, but other elements as well. Because like I said, other elements can actually add up to a fair bit in terms of your total cost.
Yeah. And then just to, I'll link it back again later, but I think particularly for startups, that view of your total direct compensation is particularly key, to Sajat's point, because a lot of times startups find it difficult to match the salaries of established MNCs, for example, when attracting a talent. But if you leverage the LTIs and you consider things from a total direct compensation perspective, then potentially you could easily match or even surpass what the talent's total direct compensation currently is. What are short-term incentives? They are designed to reward employee performance based on predetermined performance criteria. So typically, the manager and employee sit down together at the beginning of the performance year, and they set individual team or performance company performance goals that the employee has to meet in the performance year in order to receive an incentive. So the best practice is that really your company performance, whether it's the team or the company, that should be used to fund your short-term incentives. And really it pays out typically, as the name suggests, in the short term. So these can be used to motivate employees to achieve specific goals and targets, and also be used as a differentiator, such that your top performers really get a far larger short-term incentive than those who are not performing. So types of short-term incentives include variable bonus. As the name suggests, it's variable because it should be dependent on performance, whether it's the individual or the company, and the predetermined performance goals that were set. So this should vary year on year based on how well the employee or company has performed. We have sales incentive plans, and these, as Sajat mentioned, are really geared towards sales employees. So typically, the payout curves and even the balance of the pay mix, so how much of the total cash or total direct compensation is in the form of a short-term incentive, could really depend on whether an employee is receiving a variable bonus versus a sales incentive. Then we have supplemental bonus plans. This could be for an extraordinary event that the company wants to reward employees for, and profit sharing plans as well. I'll spend a bit more time on long-term incentives, given that this is particularly pertinent to startups. So they are quite similar in a sense, similar to short-term incentives in a sense that they are also designed to reward employee performance. But as the name suggests again, we reward people. We are not very creative with names. It's paid over a longer time horizon. So it could also be used as a very strategic retention tool, because typically LTIs pay in a period of 3 or 5 years. So it could really be used as a retention tool, because in order for employees to receive a payout, they have to be employed by the company. So the purpose of LTIs is to set the employees' visions and performance to really a more long-term and sustained company performance. There are also LTIs that are tied to performance. So if an employee is not performing, they will not receive, or if they do not meet a performance target, then the shares do not vest. As mentioned earlier, not only does this provide employees the opportunity to become shareholders and share in the company's success, it can also help balance a startup's cash flow while also equalizing the employees' market value. Also, we've seen that there are several tax or accounting efficiencies because really you're rewarding for you're earning the compensation, the employee is earning the compensation now, however, you're paying later.
One point I'll add, Sherry, is that I think in terms of LTI design, and we've seen the typical market practice where, you know, startups get to a reasonable amount of size, and startups starts to issue stock to almost all employees, right? Especially in the tech industry. And I think, again, I'm just talking from my experience. If you think about how much money you're putting to a junior employee, number one, again, depending upon the design of your award, and also looking at your profitability, sometimes actually it's better not to give them anything and put everything in cash, right? To Sherry's point, there is a cost of management, there's a cost of administration. Whatever tool you're using to manage your stock is actually going to cost you in terms of whatever that money takes. Does it actually reach the intended purpose in terms of motivating employees or attracting employees? I'm not going to get into math, but we've done some analysis where giving stock to junior employees actually makes absolutely no sense. It has no impact on attraction, it has no impact on motivation, it has no impact on retention, right? Because that amount annualized makes no impact. If a junior employee gets a 10, 15, 20% upside in the next job, then your LTI plan is pretty useless, So I think it comes back to the point that the design, whether you go for an RSU or a stock option or whatever it is, has to be considered in terms of the quantum of the award that you want to give, who you want to give it to, does it even make sense or not? I actually advised a couple of startups that why do you want to give the 50 employees? I said, why are you bothering with LTIs right now, right? Put a very aggressive cash plan, so it's more line of sight, it's immediate. And for many Asian markets, actually, cash works much better than LTIs. And we're seeing the volatility with LTIs in the market right now. So in terms of also long-term sustainability of the business, cash is something that you can hold. It's easy for finance to manage as well, both in terms of payable and receivable. And so again, the design becomes very, very important.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Sorry, I was actually going to go into a bit more detail around the various plans, but I'm just cognizant of time.
Yeah.
I think just to call out that the deferred cash is I guess mainly what Sajat is talking about. You could defer bonuses and ensure that the payouts are in several tranches, maybe in a period of 2 to 3 years, and also attach performance targets to them. So although you might have a deferred payout, if the performance slips for some reason, then it does not ensure a payout. Okay, so we have all these tools. They can be pretty overwhelming, a lot of detail, and really how do we use it all to attract and retain employees? Because at the end of the day, that's what is the crux of the matter, and how you measure reward success. So in terms of attraction, again, it is not just one component or aspect of reward. We really wanted to call out that it's the entire employee value proposition. Again, compensation, benefits, culture, career development, the impact and purpose of work that is given to employees. But also, to give you several tools to consider retention. Again, long-term incentives is one big one. But really proactively to form a formal retention program or even a critical talent program where you proactively identify key employees or critical talent that you need to retain for certain purposes, whether it's the completion of a project, and particularly for critical talents to ensure that maybe a project is seen through, or that you are building up a talent pipeline in this period that you would like to retain a critical talent. And there are different aspects to the program that can be developed, such as deferred cash payments, and also more holistically to develop the employees or the critical talent you would like to retain, so that they continue to feel challenged and engaged. And a lot of times, it might seem small, but can be really mighty. Benefits and wellness can be really a very strong retention tool. For example, we've seen many instances of people getting higher salary offers, bigger titles to join, say, a competitor, but they hold back and stay with the organization that they are at because of an amazing benefit such as extended maternity leave, for example, if the employees of childbearing years. So don't underestimate the power of really well thought out benefits and wellness program that of course has to be in line with your company's values. Two key things we like to call out based on our experience also is that it is really important to make compensation and performance management an objective, not an afterthought, especially as we're heading into performance evaluation and compensation review season. It's really important that, as Sajjad mentioned, reward communication is really also about sending the right message to an employee. That's where paying for performance really comes into play, because if you have somebody who's top rated in your team, you want to say that we've really gone the extra mile and we're paying you 3 times of what you thought you were going to get for your bonus because you've outperformed everybody, for example. And if paying for performance has been successfully executed and ingrained in your organization, then it also comes to accepting positive attrition in the organization. A lot of startups and even MNCs, managers panic when an employee resigns, but really there is turnover that could benefit the organization. So for example, if you have stuck to paying for performance and differentiating your incentives based on performance, then typically what would happen is that the poor performer who has not received a short-term incentive will then decide to leave, and that's okay. So I guess, to tie it all back together, while we have these, reward frameworks and tools, really, when it hits reality, it's also about optimizing costs. And again, this is where a structure, a very consistent philosophy and framework really comes into play. If you've linked your compensation philosophy to strategic objectives and outcomes, then really, it can sustain performance and the delivery of which, if your policies and processes are structured, this enables you to very clearly link your performance, whether it's revenues or sales or profits, to your incentive budgets, and that will help fund your incentives and manage your costs. And also paying for performance really optimizes your costs, because if you think about it, if you have a bonus pool of $10,000 and 10 employees, there have been managers who say, oh, I want to be fair, and that's why for my 10 employees, I offer $1,000 per employee. But it could really send a much stronger message and optimize costs and lead to positive attrition if you are giving the top performer 3,000 and the bottom performer nothing. Also, having structure will then lead to very clear governance, controls, and accountability. And one key thing that you've heard come up a couple of times throughout the course of the webinar is also that of market benchmarking. By performing regular benchmarking and pulse checks of the market, it also helps to optimize costs, because then you can ensure that you're not underpaying or overpaying compared to market in order to attract and retain talent. Also, by having very clear structures as well as compensation tools, whether it's pay structures or salary ranges, having bonus or incentive multipliers to reward your top performers, that helps optimize your costs and distribute the bonus or incentive pools more efficiently.
A couple of thoughts from me, Sherry, on this. If you think about any business in the world, whether it's a small cafe or the largest company, employment cost is either the number one or the number two cost in the world for any business, right? And the challenge is that unfortunately startups don't understand that. And again, I'm sharing this based on my experience, having discussed with many of them. And again, you look at the numbers, 9 out of 10 startups don't survive. Why is that? So I'm not going to talk about the monetization part, but when we talk about employment costs, it is a big cost, anywhere between 25 to 70% of revenue, right? And so managing that to a point around governance and control, right? You're spending all this money. What benefit are you getting, right? And ultimately, what you want is long-term sustainability. If you look at some of the biggest companies in the world, non-tech, right? They look at profitability as a huge factor in terms of how they drive business, right? Especially you get to a point, and it's cyclical, where your top line is not going to grow forever. You're not going to grow 40% or 400%. It is going to even out. But if you're not paying attention to how you manage your employment cost, not just in terms of salary, but all the things that we talked about, right? Incentives and benefits and all the other things. And there's also a cost of operation, right? That's basically, you send your employees on training. You send your employees on foreign travels. You have fancy lunches and you have a very fancy office, right? It all adds up, right? And so, think about a car where you have tires, you have an engine, you have fuel, you have the seats inside. Yeah, the car might run if the tire is punctured, but it's not going to be optimized. If the engine is not fine-tuned, it's going to make noise. It's not going to give you optimal performance. We do all these things that Sherry talked about so that the car is in optimal condition, right? And it can run long distances, right? And the mileage per liter is maximized, right? And a lot of this is around building the structure to make sure we understand what's needed when, and where you plug and play, and where it comes in handy. So it is a bit of work, and there is a bit of science. And that's why, we call, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the science and the art behind the world of total rewards and compensation to that extent. And to that extent, that's the problem. And that's the reason for this seminar, because we want startups to start taking this seriously. Because, we are getting into more of a difficult space over the next few months in terms of recession coming in. A lot of companies are holding back. You've seen, unfortunately, employees losing jobs. That's because they realize cost. The fundamental driver for all these companies is around cost, right? So yeah, just a couple of thoughts on that. I'm just going to wrap up quickly. I'm conscious of time. I want to leave some time for the Q&As. Very quickly, again, we've covered a number of these, in fact, probably many of these during the webinar. This is just our recommendation that if you are running a startup or if you're working with a startup, what are the few things that you should look at? What is higher priority for you, right? So, and I would say that yes, performance management, we put medium, but the reason for putting medium is that because performance management, you don't create and you don't implement overnight. You put something in place, it's going to take you 6 months, 9 months to understand whether this system, the design, the behaviors are working or not. But things in terms of org design, job evaluation, market benchmark, like we mentioned earlier, Sherry mentioned, it's all a logic. It's logical. It's step by step. You start with org design. You look at your jobs. You look at org sizing. That determines your market benchmarking strategy, salary benchmarking, whatever businesses you have. Same will apply to benefits as well. Your benefits and wellness strategy, right? How you want to give, what's the values, like Sherry said, you want to drive, all of that. That's something that actually can be done in a fairly, short amount of time. And like I said, this impact is not this structure you're building, not only for now, but for the next many years. And as your business grows, the fundamentals are going to stay. You will just need to manage a larger structure, but the basic principles will stay. So our recommendation is the following. Please have a look at this. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to, like I said, take this after the call. Very quickly, I want to just wrap up by sharing a couple of slides in terms of how we can help you guys. We obviously provide advisory services in this area, whether it's design, it's strategy, it's communication, implementation. From a total reward framework perspective, one of the slides we shared earlier was that we look at not only reward, but we look at the talent side of things as well. Because reward alone is not going to solve the problem, and talent alone is not going to solve the problem. We have to look at your talent, your business, your roles, and then determine what kind of design work we need to do and how do we communicate that, right? We obviously provide learning interventions as well, and I'm not going to go through them. And we are in the process of actually helping create a couple of tools that will help companies become better in terms of data management, in terms of running analytics, and in terms of holding, making the right decisions for your talent. Our advisory areas, very quickly, again, we talked about all these, but we do a lot more as well. Sherry talked about recognition programs, one of the most underutilized tools that companies can use, right? So we think about how do we build a building, but there's an element of design in it, right? You want 5 floors, you want 8 floors, you want 40 rooms or 3 rooms, how many meeting rooms you want to have. So that's the design part of it. And of course, cost, what kind of materials you're going to use, right? And again, a lot of work we do is actually with finance. When you talk about budgeting, when you talk about incentives are supposed to be self-funded, right? So elements of design, science, and math come into play. And a lot of stuff that we do is through analytics and visualizations. We've always had data. Businesses always have had data. We just don't know how to use the employee-related data. And that's where we think we can help companies become efficient and drive better decision-making. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for your time and your attention. I know that we have a few questions sent to us, but if there are any questions that any of you would like to ask us, then maybe we can take them now before we jump into the already sent questions. Any questions from the group here? Yes. Sorry. I think. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, sorry, I just have a question, right? So it's pertaining because I'm actually working as a HR in a startup, and it's difficult as a HR professional trying to convince the founders or your management to adopt something like that. So, from your experience, how do you think we can actually go about doing it?
I'll take a stab. Sherry, please jump in. Look, I think like anything in life, you have to sell, right? You don't go and say, hey, I want $10,000 because somebody's leaving. The reality is that, even when you create a new program, you have to sell why you want to do it, right? And so, there was a slide which showed 5 factors. If you tell them why you want to do market benchmarking, why do you need market data, right? If you go and say, I want, whatever $1,000 because I want to see what market is paying, it's a very reactive approach. If you explain, we need it because we need to understand the roles, and above the roles, what the org structure is. And you go into the fact that, org structure, like Sherry said, has a dollar value attached to it, right? So you have to figure out what you want, but how do you sell that story, right? So the story is all the things that we talked about. You have to build the framework, why we need the framework, and hopefully, and like I also tell you, you go 10 times, maybe the management will agree 2 times. It doesn't work, you go every time and you get what you want. So, but at least it helps. And also what it does is to build the credibility, because it allows your leaders to know that you're thinking a little bit holistically. You're thinking about the cost, you're thinking about both the short-term and long-term implications. And it helps next time you go, they will trust you a little bit more. Sherry, anything to add?
I think just one quick thing is to rely on the data that you have to really sell your story. We found that has helped in many cases where, say you're having challenges attracting people to the company, or you're losing talent because of, and use your data to tell that story. We've lost, 10% of the population or more, and they've moved for X percentage on average. So we really need to get reliable market data in order to remain competitive. For example, that could help.
Sure.
Thanks, Sherry.
Thank you.
We got a couple of questions from Rahul. Rahul, always difficult questions. First one is, hiring from startups at senior level is a challenge from a cost LTI perspective. How can we handle in your view? Look, I think there are a couple of thoughts I can share with you, and I'll share an example. Just before I left, we were trying to hire somebody, and we had a similar situation. And one of the jokes we made was that, we have a budget of a Toyota, but we want to hire a Ferrari, right? And that's just not going to work. So I think we have to be realistic sometimes. It's a bit of a challenge. But I think from a compensation perspective, because we have between cash, so salary, we have incentives, we have what we call cash sign-on, we have retention bonus, we have LTI. I think we can be a little bit of, we can be a bit creative in terms of how we play around with the numbers. So if we can, we go as much as we can on salary, where we have a gap, how much of LTI can we come in? If LTI and salary doesn't cut it, can we do a cash sign-on, maybe over 2 years or 3 years? So without creating a new benefit or an allowance, I would say between sign-on, retention bonus, salary, and also, like I said, LTI, I think we can be a bit creative. And I've seen, us doing that over the years as well.
Yeah, just to quickly add, I think the part about deferring the payments and matching potentially the LTI payout is also important, because you don't want to front load that payment to the employee with the new offer. So to still defer the LTI match or whatever it is to follow the existing vest schedule as possible.
Thanks. Next question, strategy, structure, jobs and startups are ever changing. How relevant would be job evaluation in the ever changing context and environment? I think Sherry and I were discussing this earlier. I think I would say that, you think about the org structure and job evaluation and roles, once it hits sort of like a minimum critical mass. I would, at least in my random, no science to this, but I would say once you hit 40, 50 employees is when I would start looking at the org structure and jobs. Because if you have 20 people, you have all of them doing different jobs. It's a very small business. You're right. Job evaluation won't make sense. When you hit 40, 50 and plus employees, you probably have 3 or 4 levels in the organization. So grading becomes important, and you start to have distinct sort of functions. So you have a marketing team, you have a sales team, you have finance, so on and so forth. So to an extent, I think it starts to make sense. Specifically around the ever-changing, I would say that even for startups, if you have a 50 employee startup, there will be about at least 30 to 40% jobs that are not going to change, right? So your finance roles are not going to change. You have 5 people doing sales, maybe 2 of those sales job is not going to change. So, there's what we call the anchor roles in the organization that are not going to change. But if there are other roles that are changing, I think it's worthwhile. And if the organization is also growing, I would say that, evaluate every 2 years, because again, the market is changing so fast and companies are growing so fast and especially when the money comes in, that, I think it's worthwhile doing job evaluation. In fact, I think Sherry and I, we both love job evaluation. Our recommendation is that if I think it's worthwhile doing job evaluation, especially for critical roles, every 2 to 3 years max, because the markets are changing really, really fast. Sherry, anything to add?
Nope.
Okay.
Thank you.
Saad, go ahead, please.
Hi, Sajjad. Thank you for the session. My question is mainly, by the way, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is basically about regarding the salary surveys that we are having on hand. Numerous companies are out there. Mercer does it annually every year. Then Korn Ferry has stepped into the market as well. Then they are different. So my question here is, since we are talking about startups, so startups are generally, if you see around in the subcontinent as well as in the Far East as well, you see 2 types of startups coming in as per when we talk about industry. One is from the e-commerce standpoint and the other one being the tech.
Yeah.
So when we look at getting a salary survey done, so we don't find relevant partners to actually accompany us in this journey of ours.
Yeah.
So how does your company the talent accelerators help us in this as well? Because obviously when you look at Mercer specifically has a specific job hierarchy, but then again that doesn't serve the purpose of a startup, because these companies such as I work for Taras, so we actually are not that much well sorted and structured. So the jobs that we have on hand technically are a little different to benchmark ourselves with corporates at the same time becomes hard. At the same time, startups don't really comply with these generally the surveys, and they are very critical about sharing their data with their competitors. So what's your take on that, and how are you going to tackle this in near future?
Big question. I'm going to try and answer, and Sherry, please jump in as well. Look, I think, Saad, the reality is that what you're facing happens across many, many times, even for structured industries like pharma, consumer, where sometimes you don't get the data. Look, maybe we can take this offline. My very quick response would be, we need to probably understand what kind of roles structure that you have, right? So very quick example, if you don't have the market data that's relevant to you, that's Mercer's not providing or whatever it is, right? There is always a slightly cheekier way of using whatever data you have to arrive at the closest point to where the data starts to make sense, right? So I'll give you a very simple example. You have a job called software developer, right? And in the market, there's no job called software developer, but there's a job called network engineer, right? Both are in IT technically, right? So what you could do is that if you're not getting the relevant data for your jobs and you're not satisfied with the quality, we start to look at a number of other data sources, what your recruitment team is doing, things like, I don't know, Glassdoor and other things, that data points you have, and whatever market data you are getting, trying to make sense out of it. Like I said, it requires a little bit of expertise, but in short, there are ways to circumvent the gap. Sherry?
Totally agree. I think just one other cheeky thing that Sada and I have done when we were both at GSK, for example, and we were opening a business in a new market that didn't currently have any market data, even with the established organizations. We champion for one. So we are very happy if you want to bring your competitors, your peer groups to us. We'll help you champion that.
I just need to be excused for 2 minutes. Sherry, you mind taking the next couple of questions? Yeah.
Yep,
Shireen,
sure.
go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think there's one from Shireen. Sorry, just reading it.
So my question is that currently I'm working for 2 startups. One is fintech and one is streaming platform. So the challenge we are facing is that it's been like 4 years I'm working with them, and I've built the basic structure from everything till now, like grading structure, if you talk about policies, everything. But the important thing, and the thing which always come as a challenge to me, is we are basically hiring most of the people like from tech sector. And if you talk about tech, so there are sometimes that specific languages and specific IT domains in which we are hiring people. And if we hire specific people from a specific sector, then sometimes we have to forego the grading structure, the policy we have made. So how I can like for every single time, if we are hiring someone and our grading structure does not fall under it, so we have to modify it just because that our current resources are then underrated. So it's like very challenging for me to maintain that grading structure in that domain, because it's always changing and IT is like growing so fast. So our grading structure is always changing if we hire some specific people from a specific background. So how can we overcome it?
Sorry, so maybe if I can take a step back, when you say that the grading structure is changing, is it because, potentially if you hire them at a certain grade, you can't afford to pay them, or they think it's a step down, or what is I guess
so
causing?
Basically the current employees who are already with me are on the lower grading structure, and the people, if I'm hiring from outside, they are on more pay scale and they are asking for more. So at the same experience level, at the same level, I have to then pay my current staff as well with the same structure the people I'm getting from outside.
Okay, so I guess if I'm understanding you correctly, something we've done in previous organizations is to create kind of like a split grade level. So potentially, if you're seeing a lot of challenges hiring maybe talent who have more international experience, so that I don't know where you've joined back, but I'm just trying to say that
Yeah.
potentially if you feel that there's a certain set of experience and skills which are maybe more local in nature in the organization, you could have maybe a series of local grades and also kind of more executive level grades, if that could help maybe fit into your grading structure, or attract more international talent into your organization. But I would just be a bit cautious that, if you are, just inflating the grades just to meet the salaries for very niche roles, then that kind of, defeats your point of a grading structure.
Shirin, I think this question is also a bit specific. So, maybe we can take it offline. I think it
Okay,
requires a little bit more discussion. So please, if you can get in touch with us via LinkedIn or something, that would be good. Farooq, boss.
Yes, Sajad and Sherry, thank you very much for this opportunity. And first of all, I'd like to thank you, both of you, for this wonderful session. Very insightful, very learning. I'm a bit, I would say, immature in the field of startups. My experience has been very conventional. And currently, as Sajad knows, that I'm working for a family-owned business, which is Hilal Foods, which is one of the largest confectioneries in the country, but obviously a very conventional business model. So my question to Sajad and Sherry would be that as you understand the context, Sajad, you clearly in Pakistan that the level of understanding of compensation benefits as a role in this country is very limited. Even in MNC, the scope is very, very, I would say, at a very inceptional level right now as compared to what's happening around the world. But if you talk about local family-owned businesses, it's kind of it's kind of minimal and negligible. So where do you start the compensation dialogue in this kind of settings?
I'll take a stab, Farooq, and please Sherry jump in. I think Farooq, and I think we've discussed this as well. I think for many of these, sort of family-owned businesses, not just in Pakistan but others, I think cost is everything to them. And I think I met with a few other sort of folks as well. I think maybe the starting point is cost management. Because if you say, and Farooq, very well, if you talk about wellness, for example, they'd probably laugh it off. They're like, we don't need wellness. We're very resilient. We don't need any emotional support, right? All of those things, I think it goes out of the window. But if you talk cost, right, that the cost is so it is. But if you do this, then maybe we'll save more cost, or we'll increase performance, or we'll get so much. I think maybe that's a starting point. Because I think otherwise many of the family-owned businesses are just not interested. And I'll share one example with you. Recently, one of the largest textile firms, they wanted to hire somebody, a good corporate, sort of leader. But the CEO was like, oh, why do we need to pay X when we can get somebody at X minus 40%? Because, ultimately I'm making all the decisions. So why do we need to pay so much, right? So they don't really care about, to your point, all of that. But I think if we can somehow get a little bit of that cost, that if you do this, then actually it's going to benefit you by why, maybe that's a starting point, because I think they only understand money.
Thank you. That was very clear. Thank you very
much. Zain, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for the session. So my question is more around the compensation structure that you shared, which shows cash, benefits, LTIs, and STIs. What are the general insights that we have in terms of Gen Zs? What do they prefer more these days? Like, if we look at 20 years back, our elders, they would prefer organizations which would give retirement benefits or medical benefits, things like these, which would have a major say in their decision to, choose a company or stick to a company. How has the trend changed, and how are Gen Zs now looking at compensation structures? Do they prefer more of cash benefit, instant gratification, or are there any things that we can do to further improve our employee value proposition?
Sherry?
Yeah, so that's a challenging one that comes up in every forum, how to engage and attract the Gen Zs. I think actually we found that a lot of the Gen Zs, of course, pay benefits. Your traditional model still works, but really to leverage benefits. So I don't know if you were the person who asked the question before, but there was a similar question, what benefits would appeal to Gen Zs? I think to address some of the key, I guess, reasons or things that the Gen Z seem to want to shortlist when they are looking for a job, work-life balance, social responsibility, mental health, and diversity. So to your point, and Sajad also mentioned earlier, in this current environment where we have a whole slew of different generations working in a company, we feel that something called flexible benefits really help. So this gives the employees that flexibility, as it suggests, whether they want to use a certain pot of money to join a gym, to top up insurance for higher healthcare for parents potentially, whether for a lot of employees, they might not necessarily be starting a family. So there have been companies who have changed childcare or parental care leave to just a broad-based family care leave days. So this can be taken to do elder care, child care, and even potentially pet care in some countries and companies. And then also to have more mental health programs in the organization. So whether it's mindfulness trainings, practices, to have mental health days off, for example. Paid sabbaticals is a big one. So if an employee has been with the company, say 3 or 5 years, you give them 1 month of paid leave. That's been a very big attraction tool for a lot of companies. And even volunteer days or a formal volunteer program where employees can engage with their colleagues to do some sort of volunteer outreach or community care. Yeah, but I think mainly in terms of the formal compensation structure, it's still been very traditional.
I'm conscious of time, so I think we'll take just one more last question, and then we'll wrap it up. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, I'm Asad from CoLabs. I'm heading people and culture. So like my question is, and thank you very much for the session. The startups had again very limited kind of benefit structure available with us. So like the major portion is the salary that we offer. And then another important part is the stocks that we can offer. Now, keeping in view the Pakistani dynamics and the understanding people have, it often becomes very hard to make people understand that what stock values for them. So like, how do you, like, what do you suggest how we need to project? Can we project those in our offer and converting those into a monetary value based on their current and PKR value, or we should like just keep it how like the way they are? So how we can effectively project those?
I would actually say that I don't know why you offered LTIs in the first place, right? And I think I mentioned this earlier as well. To be honest, I think for a lot of startups, and I understand that the talent dynamics in the Pakistani market, or actually in startups, even in high sort of crazy markets like China and Australia and India. Look, LTIs, to be honest, 70% of employees are not going to understand really how LTIs work. They don't stay in the organization that long, right? And at the sort of junior level, if you're offering somebody even $5,000, but looking at the tech market right now, and it vests over 3 years or 4 years, the annualized value is not much. If your employee gets a 25% salary jump with the next offer, they're not going to wait for 2 days. They're going to jump tomorrow, right? And that was the point that I think Sherry and I were trying to make, that the total reward framework and design will look at all those dynamics. I would actually say that if you had to make a dent, you would look at short-term incentive. Put a good bonus plan, management plan, whether it's a profit sharing plan, right? Okay, so if a bonus plan doesn't work, put a profit sharing plan that this year, if the company achieves any sort of profitability, X% of the profit will be shared amongst employees, and you can design it well. So they actually see some value on an immediate short-term basis that, okay, if I hit my targets this year, right, and if I do well and the company does well, I actually get some money out of it. Again, to Sherry's point, look at the concept, the area of benefits and wellness. And I think there's an element that a lot of startups miss about, and also answering a part of the Gen Z. There are young employees who say, we don't want any benefits, right? And we've heard this across, not just in Pakistan, but across the world. The reality is, God forbid, if your employee gets into an accident, right, and you have not covered for them any sort of insurance, then that's going to be a bigger problem for you, right? So a base level of benefits, whether it's life insurance or medical coverage or whatever it is, I think you have to provide, and then you have to communicate to employees, right? And I'll tell you from example, absolutely, that if that need, God forbid, arises, the employee will be 3 times thankful, because they don't realize the value of something till they need it, right? And by the way, for many of these, you don't need to spend a lot of money, right? Base level, insurance premiums and medical coverage and all that, especially in a country like Pakistan, it's not going to cost you a lot, but it's going to add value to the employee. But like I said, LTI, to be honest, is a bit of an overkill. Over the years that I think I'm seeing now, the stock price volatility, the valuation going up and down, employees don't care. The junior employees, for most employees, it doesn't matter. What they want is cash, right? They want, like Sherry mentioned, benefits and wellness, right? Career development, all of that. So I would say keep it simple. If you are actually offering, but if you think the intended purpose is not achieved, I would say cancel it. Cancel it for employees, put an incentive plan in place, and make sure you pay them well. All right, I'm conscious of time. I know we're almost 20 minutes above, so we will call it a day. Again, thank you so much for everyone for your time attending, staying with us throughout, and your questions. Like I said, please reach out to me and Sherry via LinkedIn. Send us a message. We'll be very happy to take the conversation forward. And again, if your company needs any help, please reach out to us. We'll be very happy to help. So with that, again, thank you very much. Have a good afternoon, good evening, and all the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.